Welcome back to the deep dive. I have to admit, when I first saw the stack of sources for today, I had a moment of hesitation.
Oh, yeah.
I looked at the title and I thought, okay, really? Are we going there? Because usually when you see this topic online, it's a comment section war.
It is usually a very loud, very angry argument, yes. It gets heated, to put
Yeah.
it mildly.
Exactly. But then I started reading through the materials you pulled, the historical records, the ancient cosmology papers, the studies on psychology, and I realized pretty quickly that this isn't actually a debate about the shape of a planet. I mean, it is, but that's the boring part.
That is the least interesting part of the conversation, honestly. The real story is so much bigger.
Right. What this actually is a massive, sprawling story about human perception. It's about history, it's about how we know what we know, and honestly, it's about the stories we tell ourselves to feel smart.
It is a journey through the evolution of thought. We are going to look at how humanity figured out where we are in the universe. And the road to getting there is much stranger than just people used to be dumb and now we are smart.
That is the vibe I want to shatter today. We are diving into the flat Earth, but we aren't doing the YouTube debunking video thing.
No, not at all.
We are going back to ancient Mesopotamia, we are going to the royal courts of the Ming Dynasty, and we are definitely going to spend some time in the 19th century to figure out who lied to us about Christopher Columbus.
That is the part that usually surprises people the most, that big reveal.
So let's set the stage with a bit of a double twist hook just to orient you. Twist number one, the ancients, and I'm talking the really ancient civilizations, absolutely thought the world was flat. It was intuitive, it was obvious, and we are going to talk about why. But twist number two, the people you think thought it was flat, the medieval Europeans, the peasants, the church, the people in the so-called Dark Ages, actually didn't.
That is the big myth. If you grew up thinking Columbus sailed to prove the world was round while everyone else was terrified he'd fall off the edge, you were told a lie.
You were told a story.
A literal fiction invented hundreds of years later for, political reasons.
My entire third grade history class feels like a betrayal right now.
We are going to fix that. But the mission for this deep dive is to unpack what historians call this archaic conception. We need to understand why the flat Earth model existed in the first place, why it vanished in the West, why it stuck around in the East for so long, and the really fascinating, somewhat terrifying reasons why it has suddenly returned in the 21st century.
And we have a really diverse stack of sources today. We've got translations of Babylonian tablets, we've got analysis of Chinese astronomy, we've got the specific history of the modern flat Earth resurgence from Wikipedia and some sociological studies. So let's start at the very beginning, the floating log.
The floating log. This brings us to Thales of Miletus.
I read that in the notes, Thales of Miletus, around 550 BC, and the image is just so specific. He didn't say the Earth was a rock or a mountain. He said it was a log floating in water.
It sounds funny to modern ears, but we have to put ourselves in the headspace of an early observer. We need to distinguish between ignorance and observation.
Okay.
If I ask you to forget everything you learned in school, forget the globes, forget the NASA photos, forget satellites, and just walk outside and describe the world based strictly on your sensory data, what would you say?
Well, if I'm standing in a field, it looks flat, maybe a bit bumpy with hills, but generally the horizon is a straight line. It doesn't curve.
Precisely. If you are on a boat looking at the ocean, the horizon is a flat line 360 degrees around you.
Yeah.
If you are in the desert, it's a flat plane. The intuitive view, the default factory setting for the human brain, is a flat Earth. It is what your eyes tell you every single day.
So early civilizations weren't being anti-science, they were being empiricists. They were trusting their primary data source.
They were being literalists. They were building a model of the world based on the evidence they could gather themselves. And this connects to the floating log. Why water?
Right, why always water?
If you look at the ancient Near East, Egypt, Mesopotamia, their entire existence depended on water. The Nile, the Tigris, the Euphrates. Water was life.
And the ocean surrounding the land.
Right. So in the Near Eastern mythology, and specifically in the Egyptian texts, the world is portrayed as a disk that rose out of a massive, infinite, chaotic ocean.
The cosmic ocean.
In Egypt, they called it Nun. It was the primordial waters. The earth was just a bubble or a mound of dry land floating in this endless sea. And makes sense, right? If you dig down into the earth, what do you eventually hit?
Water, groundwater.
And if you travel far enough in any direction, what do you hit?
The ocean.
So logically, the land must be floating on top of the water. There's water below and water all around. It's a very coherent, if incorrect, picture.
That actually makes a disturbing amount of sense if you don't know about gravity or geology. But the part of this ancient worldview that I found most beautiful and also kind of claustrophobic is the sky. They didn't see the sky as empty space.
No, the concept of space is very modern. For the ancients, the sky was a solid object. This is the firmament.
The rakia in Hebrew, right. I saw that word in the sources.
Yes. The word implies something hammered out, like a metal sheet or a dome. In the biblical view, and the Babylonian view before it, the sky is a solid, arched structure. It's like a glass snow globe.
So the earth is the flat bottom of the snow globe, and the firmament is the glass dome over the top.
Exactly. And its job is to hold back the waters above.
Wait, water's above, so there's water on top of the sky dome?
They believed there was water up there, which explains why the sky is blue, like the ocean, and why it rains.
Of course.
The firmament had windows or sluice gates that God could open to let the water in.
Wow.
Rain wasn't a meteorological cycle. It was a deliberate opening of the cosmic plumbing.
That is such a cozy, enclosed image. It's like living in a house. The floor is the earth, the roof is the firmament. And the stars. What about the stars in this model?
In this model, the stars aren't distant suns billions of miles away. They are lights embedded in the dome. Think of jewels set into a ceiling, or lamps hanging from a roof. The sun and moon were also just larger lights moving along tracks set into this dome.
It's interior decorating on a cosmic scale.
It creates a universe that is focused entirely on humanity. We are in the center, on the stage, and the whole universe is just the theater building around us. Very anthropocentric.
And the Greeks, I feel like we always give the Greeks a pass as the smart ones, the math guys. But the early Greek poets were right there with the Babylonians on this.
Oh, absolutely. If you read Homer or Hesiod, we're talking 8th century BC, way before the philosophers we know. They describe the shield of Achilles. This is a famous passage in the Iliad where Hephaestus makes a shield, and on it he depicts the entire cosmos. And it's a disc.
A flat circle.
A flat circle surrounded by the river Okeanos. Oceanos wasn't just a body of water to them. It was a titan, a god, a river that flowed back into itself in a circle, bounding the edges of the world. It was the begetter of all life.
That word edges is doing a lot of work there. That's the scary part. If there is an edge, there is a drop.
And that fear of the edge is something that permeates these early cosmologies. It's why the cosmic ocean is often seen as dangerous or chaotic. It's the boundary between the known world and the unknowable abyss.
This brings us to the pre-Socratic philosophers. This is a group I've always found fascinating because they are trying to move away from Zeus did it to here is a physical explanation, even if the physical explanation is wild.
They are the bridge between mythology and science. They're asking the right questions, even if they get the wrong answers.
We mentioned Thales in his log, but then you have his student, Anaximander, and his theory is, well, it's industrial.
It's very specific.
The cylinder.
He didn't think it was a flat, thin disk. He thought the Earth was a stone column or a cylinder, like a drum. And we live on one of the flat surfaces, the top. The height was about 1/3 of its diameter, according to him.
So the Earth is a hockey puck, a very thick hockey puck suspended in space.
A hockey puck, yes. But here is the genius of Anaximander, even though his shape was wrong. He had to answer the question, what is holding the puck up?
Right. Thales said water.
But Anaximander asked, what is the water resting on? It's turtles all the way down, right?
Right. You need a base. You always need a final turtle.
Anaximander said, nothing. He said the Earth stays in place because it is equidistant from everything else in the universe. It is in the center. Because it is in the center, it has no reason to move up, down, left, or right. It is held in place by equilibrium.
That is actually incredibly sophisticated. He's talking about forces, essentially, rather than a giant turtle or a peller. He's using logic, not just an image.
Exactly. It's a huge leap in abstract thinking. He's the first person we know of to imagine the Earth floating freely in space. But then you have Anaximenes, who comes along and says, no, that's too complicated. It's a leaf.
A leaf.
He went back to the flat disk idea. He said the Earth is flat and broad, and because it is broad, it rides on the air like a leaf or a kite. The air pressure underneath holds it up. He also thought the sun and moon were flat, fiery bodies that also floated on the air.
Okay, so we have a log, a hockey puck, and a kite. And then there was Archelaus with the saucer.
Archelaus is interesting because he was trying to solve a specific observational problem. This shows they weren't just making things up, they were wrestling with data.
Okay, what was the problem?
Travelers had noticed that the sun rises and sets at different times depending on where you are, east or west. If the Earth were perfectly flat, everyone would see the sunrise at the exact same instant.
Right. Pop. The sun clears the horizon. Everyone sees it.
But they knew that wasn't true. So Archelaus suggested the Earth was depressed in the middle, like a bowl or a saucer. The raised rim meant that the sun would be blocked for some people while visible to others.
So he's twisting the flat Earth model into a pretzel to try and make it fit the data. He's patching the bugs in the code.
That is the hallmark of this era.
Yeah.
They are gathering data, astronomical data, travel logs, and they are trying to cram it into the flat framework because that's what their intuition tells them must be true.
Before we leave the ancient flat Earth, we have to talk about the Norse, because their version of the cosmic ocean isn't just water, it's a monster.
The Norse cosmology is extremely visceral. You have Midgard, the Earth, which is a flat, circular realm, and surrounding it is the great ocean. But the ocean isn't just empty, it is the home of Jormungandr,
The Midgard serpent.
a snake so large that it encircles the entire world and bites its own tail.
I've always loved that image, the Ouroboros on a global scale, but looking at it through this lens, it's a containment field.
It is. In the Gylfaginning, one of the key Norse texts, the ocean is described as impassable. The snake represents the boundary. It's the do not enter sign for humanity. The reason the oceans don't drain off the edge is because this living force is binding it all together.
It really highlights the difference between the modern view of the ocean and the ancient one. To us, the ocean is a highway. We ship cargo across it. To them, the ocean was the barrier. It was the end of reality.
And that psychological barrier, the idea that there is a limit to the world, is something that takes a long time to break. It requires a shift from trusting your gut to trusting your math.
Which segues perfectly into part 2, the Great Shift. The Greeks start seeing curves.
This is one of the most important moments in intellectual history. It happens in Greece, starting with Pythagoras in the 6th century BC, who seems to have suggested it for aesthetic reasons. He just thought spheres were the most perfect shape.
Of course he did.
But it really solidifies with Aristotle around 330 BC.
No, why did they change their minds? Did someone sail around the world?
No, and that's the beauty of it. They figured it out without leaving the Mediterranean. It wasn't about travel. It was about deduction and observation.
So Aristotle lays out 3 main arguments in his book on the heavens. And these are arguments that, spoiler alert, modern flat earthers still struggle to answer.
They're simple, elegant, and devastating to the flat model. The first one is the stars. Aristotle points out that travelers going to Egypt see stars that are invisible in northern Greece, and stars that are visible in both places appear higher in the sky in the south and lower in the north.
So the dome of stars is shifting relative to your position. The further south you go, the more of the southern sky you see.
Right. If the Earth were flat, moving a few hundred miles north or south shouldn't change the angle of the stars that much, unless the stars were, like, really close. But the shift happens uniformly. It implies you are walking along a curve, and as you do, your personal horizon is tilting.
Okay, that's clever. Argument number 2, the moon.
The lunar eclipse. This is my favorite one. When the Earth passes between the sun and the moon, it casts a shadow on the moon. Aristotle simply pointed out, look at the shadow. It is always a curve. The edge of the shadow is always part of a circle.
And a flat disk could cast a circular shadow, right? Like a dinner plate.
Only if the dinner plate is facing the sun directly, perfectly face on. But eclipses happen at all different times of night, with the Earth in all different orientations relative to the sun. If the Earth were a flat disk, eventually you would get a shadow that looked like a thin line, the edge of the plate, or an oval.
But it's not.
It is always a circle. The only shape that casts a circular shadow from every single angle is a sphere.
That is the mic drop moment for me. You can see it with your own eyes. You don't need a telescope. You just need an eclipse.
And the third one is the ships. We've all heard this one, but it's powerful. A ship sailing away from you doesn't just get smaller until it's a dot. It sinks. The hull disappears first, then the sails, then the little flag on the top of the mast. It's going over the curve of the Earth.
So by 330 BC, the intellectual heavyweights know it's a sphere. But knowing it's a sphere and knowing how big it is are 2 different things. Enter Eratosthenes.
Eratosthenes, the librarian of Alexandria, around 240 BC. This story is often told as he put a stick in the ground, but we need to unpack the genius of the experiment because it's a masterclass in geometry and observation.
He used the sun as a protractor.
Basically, he heard a report or read it in a scroll in the library that in the city of Syene, which is modern Aswan, on the summer solstice at noon, the sun was directly overhead.
And how did they know that?
Because there was a deep well, and at that specific moment, the sun shone all the way to the bottom. It illuminated the water. There was no shadow cast by the rim of the well.
So the sun is 90 degrees straight up, perpendicular to the ground.
Right. But in Alexandria, which was almost directly north of Syene, on the same day at the same time, a stick in the ground did cast a shadow. Eratosthenes measured the angle of that shadow. It was about 7.2 degrees.
Okay, so we have 0 degrees in Syene and 7.2 degrees in Alexandria. What does that tell us?
Here is the geometry. Eratosthenes made two assumptions. One, that the sun was so far away that its light rays are hitting the Earth, essentially parallel to each other.
Which is a good assumption.
And two, that the Earth is a sphere. If the Earth was flat, the parallel rays would hit both cities at the same angle. Both sticks would have no shadow. The only reason for the difference in shadow length is if the surface of the Earth is curving between the two cities.
So the 7.2 degrees represents the amount of curvature of the Earth between those 2 points.
Exactly. He realized that 7.2 degrees is 150th of a full circle, which is 360 degrees. So, if that's the case, the distance between Alexandria and Syene must be 150th of the Earth's total circumference.
Now he just needs to know the distance between the cities. He didn't have Google Maps. How do you measure a distance of, 500 miles? In 240 BC.
You hire a professional, they were called bimetists.
Bimetists.
Professional pacers. Walkers, their entire job was to walk long distances with a perfectly consistent stride length and count every single step. They were human odometers.
Can you imagine the pressure on that guy? 1001, 1002. Hey, don't talk to me. I'll lose count.
I have to start over in Alexandria. It sounds absurd, but they were surprisingly accurate. They determined the distance was about 5,000 stadia.
And a stadia is?
It's an ancient unit, and we're not 100% sure of its exact length, which is why there's some debate over its final number. But based on the most likely conversion, he did the math. 5,000 times 50 is 250,000 stadia. That comes out to roughly 40,000 kilometers.
Bitches.
Almost exactly the real number. He was within 1 or 2% of the actual polar circumference of the Earth. With a stick, a well, and a guy walking. It's one of the greatest scientific experiments in history.
That is mind-blowing. And there's always a but in this story. Not everyone was convinced. We have to talk about the holdouts. Because even in the ancient world, there were skeptics.
Lucretius is the most famous one. He was a Roman poet and philosopher in the 1st century BC. He followed the atomist school of thought, like Democritus.
Why did he hate the sphere? What was his beef with it?
It was philosophical, not observational. He believed the universe was infinite. If the universe is infinite, it can't have a center. The Aristotelian model relied on the Earth being the center of the universe, where all heavy things naturally fall.
Right, down meant toward the center of the Earth.
Lucretius said, if there is no center, why would things fall to a ball? Why wouldn't they just fall down? He believed in a universal down.
Ah, the universal down idea. A single direction for the whole infinite cosmos.
Right, and this led him to mock the idea of the antipodes.
You antipodes. We need to define this word because it keeps coming up in the sources.
Anti-opposite podes. Feet?
Yeah.
People whose feet are opposite yours. The people on the other side of the globe.
Lucretius thought this was a comedy routine.
He wrote that the idea of men walking upside down or rain falling upwards into the sky on the other side of the world was absurd. He basically said, look, have you ever seen anything fall up? No. So why would people stick to the bottom of a ball?
It's intuitive again. Without a theory of gravity, the idea that mass attracts mass, the sphere does seem ridiculous. Why doesn't the water drain off the bottom? Why don't people in Australia just fall off?
Exactly. But despite Lucretius, the consensus held. By the time of the Roman Empire, Pliny the Elder writes in his encyclopedia that everyone agrees on the spherical shape. It was settled science in the West. They still argued about the antipodes, but the shape was a given.
In the West. But if we pan the camera across the Silk Road to China, we enter a completely different reality, a parallel intellectual universe.
The Chinese exception. This is a part of the history that often gets skipped, but it's crucial. China had a civilization just as advanced, if not more so, than Rome. They had brilliant engineers, astronomers who cataloged comets, mathematicians who calculated pi. But they operated on a flat Earth model almost until the 17th century.
How is that possible? How do you map the stars effectively if you have the wrong shape of the ground?
Well, their model was called Gaitian, the canopy heavens, and the standard phrase was, the sky is round, the Earth is square.
A square Earth, not even a circle.
Yes, think of a chessboard. And over the chessboard, you have a round canopy or an umbrella that rotates. That was the heavens. It was a deeply ingrained philosophical and cosmological view.
But I recall reading about an egg analogy. Zhang Heng, a brilliant polymath in the Han Dynasty, described the universe as a hen's egg. That sounds pretty spherical.
This is where translation and interpretation get tricky. In the 20th century, Western historians like Joseph Needham read Zhang Heng's text, and Zhang wrote, "The heavens are like a hen's egg. The earth is like the yolk of the egg and lies in the center."
Okay, yolk equals round. Case closed, right? That sounds like he got it.
That's what Needham thought. He argued that the Chinese knew it was a sphere, but later scholars looked closer at the context and at Zhang Heng's other writings. In another text, Zhang Heng himself wrote, "Earth takes its body from the yin, so it is flat and quiescent."
Flat and quiescent. So the egg analogy was about what?
Position. Position. Nesting. He meant the earth is inside the heavens, fully enclosed, like a yolk is inside an egg. But not that it was a sphere. The yolk can be flat inside the shell.
Ah, so it was about being enclosed, not about being spherical.
Precisely. And this philosophical commitment to the square earth had real consequences for their science. There's a story about how they tried to do an Eratosthenes-style measurement, but it went completely wrong.
This is fascinating. What happened?
This is a perfect example of how your starting axiom dictates your results. In the Tang dynasty, around 720 AD, a monk and astronomer named Yi Ging led a massive imperial survey. They measured the shadow of the sun at different latitudes, just like Eratosthenes. They had better instruments than the Greeks. Their data was incredibly precise.
But they started with the assumption that the Earth was flat.
Right. So when they saw the shadow length change as they moved north, they didn't think the Earth is curving away from the sun's rays. They thought the sun must be much closer than we thought.
Oh, because if the Earth is flat and the shadow gets shorter, it means you're getting closer to the light source. Like walking under a street lamp, the shadow changes.
Exactly. So they used trigonometry, assuming a flat Earth, to calculate the height of the sun. They calculated that the sun was exactly 100,000 Li, which is about 200,000 kilometers above the ground.
So they did the math perfectly, they gathered the data perfectly, but because their foundational belief was Earth is flat, they ended up with a tiny, close sun instead of a round Earth.
It wasn't until the Jesuits arrived in the 1600s, specifically Matteo Ricci, bringing European globes and maps and astronomical knowledge, that the Chinese court finally began to shift toward the spherical view. It shows that intelligence isn't the same as correctness. You can be a genius and still be wrong if your starting premise is flawed.
That is a lesson for the ages. Okay, let's jump back to Europe. We need to tackle the elephant in the room, the myth of the Dark Ages.
The Columbus myth.
We were all told the story. The brave, handsome Christopher Columbus stands before the ignorant Spanish court. The priests are wagging their fingers, saying, "You can't sail west. You'll fall off the edge. The monsters will eat you." And Columbus says, "No. Science says it is round."
It is a dramatic scene. It's heroic, it's got conflict, and it is 100% fiction.
It never happened. Not one bit of it.
Never. The debate between Columbus and the Spanish Royal Commission, which actually happened, was not about the shape of the Earth. It was about the size. Everyone in the room knew it was a sphere.
They were arguing about the circumference.
Yes. The Royal Commission, which was made up of educated men, used Eratosthenes' old numbers. They said the Earth is about 40,000 kilometers around. The ocean between Europe and Asia is too big. You will run out of food and water before you get to Japan.
And Columbus said.
Columbus essentially cherry-picked bad math. He used calculations from a Persian geographer, but mixed up the units of measurement using Roman miles instead of Arabic miles, which were longer. He also underestimated the size of Asia. He basically fudged the numbers to convince himself the Earth was much smaller, about 25,000 kilometers around.
So Columbus was the bad mathematician. The ignorant priests were actually right.
The priests and scholars were scientifically correct. The ocean was too big. If the Americas hadn't been there, which neither side knew about, Columbus and his crew would have died of thirst in the middle of the Atlantic. He got lucky.
So if everyone knew it was round, where did this story come from? Why does every American schoolchild know the people thought it was flat story?
We have to blame the storyteller, Washington Irving.
The guy who wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. The Headless Horseman guy.
The very same. In 1828, he wrote a biography called A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus. It was more historical fiction than history. He wanted to write a bestseller. He wanted a hero. And a hero needs a villain.
And a bureaucratic argument about the length of a sea mile isn't a very sexy villain.
Exactly. So Irving, being a fiction writer at heart, invented the scene of the ignorant flat earth priests. He framed Columbus as the lone beacon of science against the darkness of religious stupidity. He just made it up for dramatic effect.
And people just thought it.
They loved it. It was a great story. But it wasn't just Irving. Later in the 19th century, you had scholars like John William Draper and Andrew Dixon White. They were pushing something called the conflict thesis,
What is that?
the idea that science and religion are fundamentally and eternally at war. They wanted to show that the church has always held back progress. So they latched onto Irving's story and presented it as historical fact. They effectively slandered 1,000 years of medieval scholarship to score a political point in the 1870s.
Because the reality of the Middle Ages was very different.
Completely different. If you go to a university in 1250 AD, the standard astronomy textbook was De Sira Mundi on the Sphere of the World by John of Sacrobosco.
It's in the title.
It's right there in the title. Thomas Aquinas, the greatest theologian of the era, starts his Summa Theologica by using the spherical Earth as an example of a fact that is proven by physics. He treats it as obvious, like, of course the Earth is round, just as it's obvious that.
And you mentioned the kings, the symbols they held.
The globus cruciger. You've seen it in paintings of Queen Elizabeth or Charlemagne. They hold a golden orb with a cross on top.
The holy hand grenade.
Right. That orb represents the universe, the Earth. The cross represents Christ's dominion over it. If they thought the world was flat, they would have held a plate or a disc. The fact that the ultimate symbol of power was a sphere tells you everything you need to know about the medieval worldview.
Okay, so they knew it was round, but was there any debate? Or was it total consensus?
There was a debate, but it goes back to the Antipodes. It goes back to St. Augustine.
Augustine of Hippo, 4th century, one of the most influential church fathers.
Augustine was a smart guy. He read the science of his day. He accepted the spherical shape. But he had a theological problem with the other side of the world. He argued that there could not be people there.
Walk us through the logic, why not?
It was a syllogism. Premise 1, all humans are descended from Adam and Eve. Premise 2, the equatorial ocean is a scorching hot, boiling sea, the torrid zone. No ship can possibly cross it.
Yeah.
Conclusion, if no ship can cross it, Adam's descendants could never have reached the other side. Therefore, the other side is empty. It might be land, but it is uninhabited by humans.
So the debate wasn't, is it flat? It was, is the other side empty?
Exactly. And this brings us to the one guy the myth makers always point to, Cosmas Inacopleustes.
Cosmas, who sailed to India, quite a name.
He was a 6th century merchant turned monk, and he did write a book arguing the earth was flat. He drew it as a rectangle, shaped like the tabernacle of Moses from the Old Testament.
So there was one. The myth has a grain of truth.
There was one. But he was the exception that proves the rule. His contemporaries mocked him. Another Christian philosopher, John Philoponus, wrote a scathing rebuttal telling him he was an idiot and that he was making Christians look bad by ignoring basic astronomy. Cosmas was a fringe blogger in his own time.
But modern historians, or pseudo-historians, picked him out of the trash heap and said, look, this represents the entire Middle Ages.
It's classic cherry picking. It's like looking at a flat Earth tweet from 2024 and saying, the people of the 21st century believe the Earth was flat.
Which, ironically, brings us to the 21st century, because people do believe it again.
The modern resurgence. This is the part of the deep dive that shifts from history to sociology and psychology.
When did it come back? Because for a long time, Flat Earth Society was a punchline. It was a joke about people who argue for the sake of arguing.
The modern movement starts, weirdly enough, in the 19th century. Just as the myth of the flat Earth past was being invented, a guy named Samuel Rowbotham started actually preaching it.
What was his deal?
He was an English inventor and writer. In 1849, he published a pamphlet under the pseudonym Parallax called Zetetic Astronomy. Earth, not a globe.
Zetetic. That's a key word here. What does it mean?
It comes from the Greek zetio, meaning to seek or to inquire. Rowbotham's philosophy was, do not trust theories. Do not trust what you are told by so-called experts. Trust only what you can demonstrate with your own senses.
Back to the floating log, back to the intuitive view. It all comes full circle.
Exactly. He argued that if you look at a canal, specifically the old Bedford Level Canal, which is a long, straight drainage canal, the water looks flat for 6 miles. Therefore, the world is flat. He was a master showman. He would hold public debates, shout down astronomers, and he gained a small but dedicated following.
This evolved into the Universal Zetetic Society, but it stayed pretty small, right? A handful of people.
It was a fringe curiosity. The Flat Earth Society was founded in 1956, but it never had more than a few thousand members. It was a quirk until around 2015.
The algorithm era.
We cannot overstate the role of YouTube and social media algorithms in this. Around 2015, the recommendation engines figured out that flat Earth videos were sticky.
Sticky meaning people watch them all the way through.
And commented and
Oh.
shared. They generated massive engagement. So the algorithm pushed them to millions of people. People watch conspiracy video about 9/11, and the up next would be 200 proofs Earth is not a spinning ball.
And it sends them down the rabbit hole.
A very deep one.
We have to get into the psychology of the modern believer, because unlike the Babylonians, these people have access to Google Earth. They can book a flight from Sydney to Santiago. How do they maintain the belief in the face of just overwhelming evidence?
It requires a massive psychological firewall. We call it the conspiracy necessity. Meaning you cannot believe the Earth is flat in 2026 without also believing in a massive, coordinated, global conspiracy to hide the truth.
It's a package deal.
It has to be. You have to believe NASA is fake. You have to believe all space agencies, Russian, Chinese, Indian, are working together to lie to us. You have to believe every pilot is in on it, every GPS engineer, every satellite TV technician.
It creates a villain again. They are lying to us.
And that is the appeal. It makes the believer feel special. I am not a sheep. I know the truth. I have woken up. It appeals to people who feel disenfranchised, who don't trust the government, who feel like the world is out of control. This is one thing they feel they can understand and control.
Let's talk about their model, because they don't believe in the edge where you fall off into space, right?
Generally, no. Most modern flat earthers believe in the ice wall.
Which is Antarctica.
In their map, which is usually just the UN flag logo, an azimuthal equidistant projection. The North Pole is in the center. The continents spread out from there. And Antarctica isn't a continent at the bottom. It is a giant ring of ice that surrounds the entire disk.
Like a pizza crust holding in the sauce.
Exactly. And the theory is that if you try to go there, the military will stop you. The Antarctic Treaty is viewed by them not as an environmental agreement, but as a militarized border pact to keep people away from the edge of the dome or the edge of the world.
It effectively makes the world a prison. Or a terrarium with a giant ice wall.
And that leads to the do-it-yourself science. You see these guys buying $10,000 gyroscopes or taking high-powered cameras. The Nikon P900 is famous in this community, to the beach to try and zoom in and bring ships back over the horizon.
There is a tragedy in that. They are curious, they are buying equipment, they are experimenting, they are acting like scientists, but they refuse to accept any result that contradicts their belief.
There is a famous scene in the documentary Behind the Curve, which I highly recommend, where a group of flat earthers sets up an experiment with lasers and posts over a canal to prove the water is flat.
The Bedford level experiment, updated.
Yep. And the experiment proves the water is curved, their own experiment. And instead of saying, oh, wow, I guess we were wrong, one of them says, that's interesting. And another says they encountered heaven energies that must have bent the laser.
That is the difference between science and pseudoscience right there. Science changes the theory to fit the data. Pseudoscience changes the data to fit the theory. Or just ignores it.
Precisely. And while the number of hardcore believers is small, maybe 1 or 2%, the sentiment is growing. A 2018 survey showed that only 82% of 18 to 24-year-olds in the U.S. firmly agreed, I have always believed the world is round.
Only 82%. That number should be 100%.
It's not that the other 18% are committed flat earthers. It's that they are skeptical. They've been exposed to the counter-narrative online, and now they're thinking, well, maybe.
I'm just asking questions.
That phrase is the gateway drug. It reflects a breakdown in trust. We don't trust experts anymore. We don't trust institutions. And if you don't trust anyone, you fall back on your own eyes. And your eyes tell you the world is flat.
This has real consequences for education. I can't imagine being a science teacher today.
It's a battleground. Child psychologists tell us that kids naturally develop a flat earth model. It's intuitive. A small child's universe is flat with a sky above it. Education is the process of unlearning that intuition and replacing it with a complex, non-intuitive model based on data.
But now, teachers aren't just fighting a child's natural intuition, they're fighting TikTok.
The National Center for Science Education actually provides resources now specifically for this. Teachers have students coming in saying, but I saw a video that says gravity is just buoyancy and density. The teacher has to deconstruct the algorithm's programming before they can teach the physics.
It's a heavy lift, a very heavy lift.
It is.
So let's try to land this plane or this spaceship. We've gone from Thales and his log to the brilliant geometry of Eratosthenes, to the stubborn square of China, to the fake news of Washington Irving, and finally to the YouTube rabbit hole.
It's a long, strange trip through the human mind.
What is the big takeaway here? Why should you, the listener, who presumably knows the Earth is round, care about this history?
I think it's a lesson in humility. The Earth has always been round. The physical reality hasn't changed. But our perception of it and our ability to accept it depends entirely on the tools we use and the stories we trust.
It's a reminder that common sense is often the enemy of truth.
Common sense says the Earth is flat and stationary. Science says we are spinning on a rock at 1,000 miles an hour, orbiting a fusion explosion in an expanding universe. The truth is not intuitive. It requires work. It requires trust in the collective intelligence of humanity, built up over thousands of years.
And it requires us to check our own myths. I want to leave you with a thought that kind of haunts me after going through all this. We look back at the 19th century, people who mocked the medievals. They invented a fake history, the flat earth dark ages, to make themselves feel superior and modern.
They needed to feel like they had conquered ignorance, that they were the enlightened ones.
Right. So the question is, what are we doing right now? What scientific truths or historical facts do we accept today simply because they make us feel superior to the past? What will the people doing these deep dives in the year 2500 be laughing at us for believing?
That is a terrifying question, and I don't have the answer.
Something to think about next time you look at the horizon. Thanks for diving deep with us.
Keep looking up.
See you next time.